Hello, party people. My name is Krista Keough, and you're listening to Granted, the podcast that puts the fun in funding. Today, we're in the studio with MacKeigan. Kat is an ambitious creative leader. She's the Director of External Relations at Strategic Arts Management. She's an independent arts, events, and production manager, and recently traveled to Germany to present her PhD thesis research on Nova Scotia's arts policy. I'm really excited to learn more about Kat and the work that she does. So without further delay, let's begin. Thank you for being here with us today, Kat. This is awesome. You and I first met because we were on a jury together. And I have to say that jury in particular, I learned a lot, and that experience really stuck with me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to talk a little bit about that, but I also want to know more about you, like your background and the things that you're involved in and your ideas for the future. So, this is something that maybe it's common, and I don't know if it was the case for you, but were there people in your life when you were growing up or experiences that you had that influenced you to pursue a career in the arts?
Absolutely.
Okay. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. I have kind of had this lifelong beautiful gift and extremely challenging gift of growing up in the arts. I did every day after school, I had a different extracurricular activity, which was arts-based. I did saxophone, I was in the band, I was in gymnastics, I was in dance, I was in theater. I rode horses, which is kind of in the arts in certain ways because, there's a talent to it, like I'm sure, and a technique. And so that was kind of in my young childhood. And
Okay.
I recognized that I was extremely lucky to have those opportunities.
Oh, nice.
And I remember in junior high, I think it was, I advanced in my dance class and in my acting class at the same time. And all of a sudden they were at the same schedule. And I had to decide, was I going to keep doing dance? Oh, no, it was gymnastics. But I had to decide, was I going to keep doing gymnastics or theater? And I ended up moving from gymnastics to dance. And then I got theater. And then later on again, I had the same conflict with theater or dance. And they were at the same time. And I had to choose. And theater always kind of kept winning out. So my initial discipline ended up being theater. And that's what I went to undergrad for and everything else. But I've also... While I had that wonderful upbringing, I've also had this extremely inward and outward applied conflict of getting a real job versus getting a job in the arts. And I'm constantly challenging myself to accept the arts as a real job because they are.
Yes.
They are a real job.
Yes.
And it's really interesting and challenging as a arts administrator and an arts manager and an arts producer and all of the other arts hats that I wear to know that I have this internal argument constantly with myself.
Yeah, that is
validating the work that I'm doing.
I'm shocked to hear you say that, honestly. Like, it's very surprising because you are someone who I know who you take your work very seriously, and you can see that by the choices that you make and the projects you align yourself with and the academic work that you do. Like, you couldn't be more serious about the arts, from a bunch of different angles. Yeah. So you very much consider yourself as having a career in the arts, but it's also, there is that academic element and there's also an economic element to the overall piece. So that's interesting. So your entry was really from a discipline from theater and being involved.
Yeah.
In that way. Okay.
Yeah. And then kind of going into the arts, what happened was really in this argument that I always have with myself. That's how I got my master's degree. And that's actually why I continued with the academic side of it. And even the work that I do within arts policy and cultural policy now, it's all situated. And I think it's kind of happily coming into a nice bow where it all works. But it was really, I did my undergrad in theater. I went to Toronto, as every good little theater kid does, to try and work there and, lived downtown Toronto, paying rent there, was working in Sudbury, paying rent there, working in Brockville, paying rent there. Like, I was paying rent in, so many different places.
Oh, my gosh.
and then ended up coming back home because it wasn't feasible. I wasn't ready for that experience yet, and came back home and did a master's in public administration, which kind of led me into this whole other world of arts and the idea of policy and arts policy and cultural policy and funding and
when was that, would you say, like a year around when you were doing your master's?
When I did my master's, I finished my undergrad was in 2005, so my master's would be I graduated in 2008.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So like about 10 years ago now.
Yeah, about that.
That's really cool because I wondered how I wondered about that, your journey into it, because you do both things so well. And also when you think of people who like doing theater and being that creative artist type, it's not always that you see their interest in government and policy and writing really lengthy papers and things. So that's really unique. And did you feel there was an opportunity that you could contribute to the community in a bigger way through that work, through policy and things? Because it's very dry, right? That stuff.
It is. It's dry.
But it's important. It's so important.
Necessary. It's necessary. Yeah. And I was actually just in Germany. I was just in Germany last week presenting about this, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, funny that. But no, so I was talking about my dissertation research, and my dissertation research is on Nova Scotia's cultural policy and largely around the funding. And what I've done is an institutional ethnography where instead of looking at policy from a very conventional, dry perspective of this is what we're trying to do, are we achieving these outcomes? I said, okay, well, what is policy doing and how is it like impacting what artists do? And so in doing that, one of the things that I found is that policy is dry, but it's necessary, and no one's really communicating the necessity of why policy has all of this red tape, all of this bureaucracy around it to artists. So you have policy officials and policy officers, government, politicians, blah, 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 all those people who understand because it's their language. They are the policy makers. They're making the rules. They're making the decisions. Even when you go to a funding council, kind of like ours, we sat on a peer jury. So technically we were making the funding decisions as peers. But we still had to abide by what the policy standards were. Right. We still had to follow. We still had rules that us as peers sitting in that room had to follow. And there was a public servant in that room to make sure we followed those rules, right? Those policy rules. So artists understand. Like, they understand that we sit in a room and make decisions, and that's peer adjudicated, but they don't necessarily always get the communication as to why, and especially when you're an emerging artist, when all you want to do is create, all you want to do is say, I just want to do a theater piece, I just want to play a guitar, I just want to do this, why can't I? And so within my research, for example, one of the things I found was theater people, to create, well, in any art really, to create you need money. You're talking about the economics of it. To create you need money. Yeah. Point blank. So how do you get that money? You apply to government. How are you allowed to apply to government? You have to play by the government's rules. Yeah. And that means things like creating a business, a nonprofit society, or a nonprofit cooperative. And then what does that mean? Yes. You have to then start filing taxes. You have to apply by set deadlines. You have to make sure that your work, falls within those policy scopes. You can only use that funding towards certain things. Maybe it's towards venue rental, but it's not towards paying administrative hours. Right. And then so if you're not paying your administrator, who's going to do that work? But you're going to do it. And you're going to do it for free because you really want to create. Yeah. So you're sitting at your kitchen table at midnight on a Friday night trying to fill out grant applications and figure out how to do your finances because all you want to do is create. But you know you have to do this stuff, but you really don't know how you're doing it. So it's this weird conundrum of what you're supposed to be doing, what policy wants you to be doing, and kind of circling back to where do I see. One of the things that I recognized when I was doing my master's degree and in my dissertation, and even leading me into the dissertation, the knowledge that I have ends up being a bridge. Okay. So I found myself I was frequently acting as a translator or helping navigate those two relationships between what an artist's stakeholders' interests are and what the politicians or the public servants' interests are, and kind of explaining them to each other and why there are rules, why we have to say, we're financially accountable, or it's public tax dollars, so we have to know where the money's going. It has to fall within these criteria.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. Wow. And so you were able to see, and I like how you put that you see yourself as facilitating these conversations, helping one party speak to the other, because I'm with you too in working with artists. There are, I was just having a conversation the other day, and someone was explaining the level at which government needs to report to other government, I guess, about the results of these funding programs. And so it trickles down so that people applying are asked to put together numbers. For example, what do you see as the return on investment over the next 3 years for this project you're doing? And it's like, well, to a new artist, that's really intimidating. They don't understand how to even figure out that number. And who does, I guess, really? But, there are ways to do it, and those ways are just not communicated. So it creates a barrier for new people who don't understand the system. But knowing, it's because government needs to see if this is successful. And so these numbers will be part of them being accountable. And so just understanding, even not just knowing how to do it, but just understanding why the questions are asked. And also, I love what you're saying in that taking it back. I think it's important to ask, do we need to know that, and what's a better way to get that information from people? Okay, there is, in talking about funding and sort of our experience and some things that have been happening, say, since you and I were even on that jury together. This is something that I see happening, and I want to get your thoughts on it, and it kind of plays into a current event, we'll say. So I have known of programs that organizations apply to every year, and I have felt as though some programs keep giving money to the same groups of people every year, regardless of how great their applications are. And that makes it difficult for new organizations, who aren't always the ones getting the funding, to step in to access that funding. I understand the benefit of funding an organization year after year, right? Because you get to feel secure in that too, and that's helpful, especially operational funding. But and a great example of this is the Bus Stop Theatre. And they've been in the spotlight this past week for sure, because, and really for a while now, but they're wanting to stay in the space they're in, and they need to buy the building that they're in, and they need support. And I feel like over a year ago, when there was talk about this, government had said, oh, well, we're going to try to find some funding for you. We'll set something up. We'll take it from somewhere. And that just never amounted. And now they've asked the city for funding directly to go around that, I guess, in the lack of opportunity for them to fit into funding or to get into a model. What is your take on that? And do you see that this could have been avoided had we not had this kind of crutch, or this way that we do things sometimes?
Policy is reactive.
Okay.
Policy development is reactive. It is not proactive. And politicians and public servants, in my opinion, are reactive. And that is kind of one of the fundamental problems.
Wow.
We saw it, over the past decade in terms of Nova Scotia. We haven't had a cultural policy. We do now.
Yes, the Culture Action Plan.
Yes, so we do have the
it's
action
very
plan
new,
now.
2017, I think.
Yes. If you talk to different people have different opinions on it. It's very broad.
Okay.
It has some really strong points and some more weak points in it. And it's because it's so broad, it's meant to be a overall guiding feature. But for example, prior to this plan, Nova Scotia didn't have a guiding policy. So they were creating programs without a guiding document.
Right.
Which is then where you see things like, the Nova Scotia Arts Council suddenly being dissolved, and then eventually, Creative Nova Scotia coming forwards and Arts Nova Scotia coming forwards, which are strong and awesome things, and I'm happy that we have them now. But so you see these quick responses.
Okay.
And you see these various policies or these various programs being developed. So within Arts Nova Scotia, there's a whole lot of little projects. You have your project funding, your operational funding. You now have the Creative Industry Fund, which is actually over at Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Yes. That's awesome.
There's another, so that's Creative Industries. There's also the Creative Innovation Fund, I think, or something like that, also over at CCH. So you have these various these pots of money.
Yeah.
That some of them, they now fit under the action plan, but they were kind of just being created.
Okay.
Because they were responsive. They were recognizing a need. So I'm not faulting that they were created in any way, but they were being created based on a need, not saying, oh, we recognize that we're moving in this direction or we want to foster these things. They suddenly went, oh, we need to find a way to fund new projects.
So almost like putting out fires or something. When there was something that was brought to their attention, like there's a huge lack of this support for this, and this group is being left out totally.
Yeah, or where you were talking in our experience, there's operational funding. There's only so much operational funding.
Yeah.
So when that pot is dry, you can't get anyone else into the operational funding stream because there is no money in there. That red line exists.
Right.
So what alternatives do we have? And so Arts Nova Scotia has put in various, ways to address that now, but it was responsive. So when we look at the Bus Stop Theatre and kind of what's happening on the HRM front, again, HRM doesn't have a cultural plan.
Oh.
HRM doesn't have a cultural strategy.
For the city.
Correct.
Right.
So they actually said it in council today. It was one of those ones they were talking about the Bus Stop Theatre, but this question kind of kept circling back going, they need an action plan. They need some sort of strategy, HRM being the they. But again, there's 6 or 9 months of consultant phases, and then it's going to have to go into staff, then it's going to have to be developed, then it's going to have to go to council to get approved. So we're looking, it's not next year.
Right.
So, and this is coming from the response. One of the things that council said today was they were talking about, they need an action plan. They need some sort of policy because we have the Bus Stop Theatre. There's the Khyber.
Yep.
Bloomfield.
Oh, yeah.
Culture Link.
Yes, huge.
Arts Gallery is probably going to come after them. Not come after them sounds malicious, but the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia might end up looking for money. We don't know.
Might need some support.
We don't know in the new development.
Oh, I see.
So they have all these.
Shakespeare by the Sea.
Yeah, Shakespeare by the Sea is another one there. And these are just buildings. These are cultural institutions with buildings.
Right.
So it's capital funding that they're looking for. But there's no guiding document. And so they're sitting in council today going, we really need a guiding document. Like it's happening over and over and over.
Right.
So again,
we need
it's
something
reactive.
Right. We need a way to, they probably feel like, how can we make these decisions? We're having to make them over and over. So we need some kind of guidelines so that when this comes up, and also it would be nice, proactive, like you said, in planning the future, looking at how many venues do we have that are serving all these communities, from theater to music to visual art, and also I know something that people talk about, and it's been, I guess, a sticking point, probably particularly for government, in that it's very difficult to measure the results of or the benefits of arts and culture for people, right? Like we do have some numbers of like artists who are exporting and the income they're generating, and ticket sales and attendance numbers and, views and follows. But to be able to quantify the value that arts and culture brings into our lives, like, is something that's so hard. So what in your mind, do you have ideas for that? Do you know how we can, prove to people that this is super important?
I have a lot of feelings about that.
Yeah.
So I think fundamentally, the onus should not be on the artist for validating the economic and the socio-economic impact of arts.
Okay.
It is the artist's responsibility to create.
Right.
Not to validate.
Oh, I like that.
I like that too.
Yeah.
But it is. It's their responsibility to create. We had, the Massey Commission creating the Canada Council for the Arts through their recommendations, and Shirk and a number of other things that came out of that. And so those recommendations back in 1956, Vincent Massey, when he created that, or when he put those recommendations forward. Now I forget that year, so don't, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
When he put those recommendations forward, one of the things that he was promoting and arts advocacy constantly promotes is that the arts are a public good.
Okay.
Arts need to be supported by government because we are a public good. Public goods means that it is not sustainable or viable without public support. Okay. It's providing something back to the public that is value, but we need public support to sustain it.
Okay.
So it's not saying that arts are not economically viable, but to say that the only value within the arts is the economics, or to demand quantifiable economic results,
right,
is contrary to this idea of the public good. Because the public good is not only economic, it's also social. It's also the idea of, the 6-year-old going to a theater class. Or even, my example, I grew up doing theater, gymnastics, dance, etc. every day after school.
Yeah.
At those levels, there was no economic gains necessarily. There would have been small. My parents, paying them was putting someone, giving them a paycheck in some degree and keeping a company sustainable. But you didn't see export occurring from that. I was 6. I was not going to tour Japan or something like that doing modern dance. I'm still not touring Japan with modern dance, and I don't want to, but I'm doing arts now.
Right.
So those things that happened to me as a child were formative, and they were arts-based, and they're now having an economic give back, if you will, because my discipline is within the arts. You can't, how do you measure that? I shouldn't say that you can't, but it's really hard.
It is. Yeah.
I think that one of the biggest challenges is the fact that you can't measure that within a political time frame.
Okay.
So there is that challenge as well. That, when we're talking about being accountable and when we're talking about bureaucracy and the government and why the government is funding, and that there's all this, the public taxpayer, the public purse, and everything else, government, the public servants are still eventually responsible back to their elected officials as well.
Oh, interesting. Right.
And so you have to, the chain doesn't end at this concept of who signed that check.
Right.
This chain didn't end at the programming officer signing the check. It didn't end at the executive director approving that. It continued back further. There's budgets, you see CAOs, CEOs, all these different things. So there's all these other people involved.
Right.
That are bigger than just that decision that you and I were making when we were sitting in that room on a jury. And that is where that policy comes into play, because the policy is guiding all of those things.
We've mentioned a couple different groups, like in Nova Scotia in particular, who are working in the arts. And I have recently, I guess in doing this podcast, truly, and looking up people to bring in or who I want to talk to, you kind of get on the internet and you're going down the wormhole, so to speak. But I've discovered more groups than I knew about who are doing things in the arts. And so do you think that, I think it's all really good, and I love seeing people participate and get involved in any way they can and want to. But sometimes I wonder, does this Nova Scotia Leadership Council know what Arts Nova Scotia is doing? Does Arts Nova Scotia know what Music Nova Scotia or Theatre Nova Scotia, do they, is there a way that these groups communicate? Is there one that's sanctioned to do government work and then others aren't? Or do you find it confusing sometimes, or do you see it clear?
I see it murky.
Okay.
Because I've been doing research in this field for a while.
Right. Yeah.
So I understand some degrees of it. In no way would I ever say that I understand all of it. But Creative Nova Scotia, for example, the Creative Nova Scotia Leadership Council is an active legislative body to providing recommendations to the minister on arts policy.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, and they were the group that did the Culture Action Plan. Is that right? Or led the initiative?
They advised that a Culture Action Plan should be created, and then staff created it.
Interesting. Okay.
The nuance with the Nova Scotia Creative Leadership Council is that their recommendations to the minister are confidential.
Oh, wow.
So the minister gets to decide, upon recommendation, the council sits in the room as well as some of Community Cultures and Heritage staff and also the executive director of Arts Nova Scotia. Okay. Sit in the room together when the recommendations are being made and conversations are being held. The minister makes the decisions. Conversations that happen in that room are held confidential. Okay. So technically we never know what was said in that room, what the recommendations were. We just know what the outcomes were. Yeah. Arts Nova Scotia is the arm's length public funding body. Right. So they are financed through government, through the Department of Community, Culture and Heritage. Right. Their budget comes from Community, Culture and Heritage. Okay. They're kind of more of a quasi arm's length versus a straight because their HR and administration in terms of office management is all actually now through the department. Oh. For financial kind of stability and such. Okay. Which is a nuance that's different than in other provinces. Yeah. And that was made recommendation by a study of feasibility and a study that kind of came out of the creation of the two Arts Nova Scotia and Creative Nova Scotia Leadership Council to have it in-house, not in-house, but like it's in the same building. Right. And have those administrative and HR capacities run through the department just for financing. Right. And it's, sounds like a money, just resources. Yeah, exactly. They have the system set up. Yeah. But that said, Arts Nova Scotia does operate kind of quasi-arm's length in that state. So they are making while their budget is allocated, they make their own decisions. Right. And then that money goes down into the granting pool for the juries that you and I sat on. Right. So that's the government side of it. The government side of it, right. And then there's other nonprofit organizations that are kind of doing their own work in the field. Yes. I would say like Screen Nova Scotia or Music Nova Scotia or something. Music Nova Scotia, Screen Nova Scotia. Theater? Yeah, so they kind of... those are two. And then there's also the Cultural Federations of Nova Scotia. Oh. Cultural Federations of Nova Scotia is an umbrella organization that houses... Oh, if I miss someone, I'm going to get in trouble here. Oh, that's okay. I think it houses 8. Oh, wow. It houses, if I go through here, Dance Nova Scotia, Theatre Nova Scotia, museums, Strategic Arts Management, Writers Federation of Nova Scotia, VANS, which is Visual Arts. And I'm missing one, and I knew I would, and I knew I'd get... Photography? No. Theater, dance, visual art, sculptures, crafting, painting. Craft. Thank you. And craft. So and then all those little organizations, I shouldn't say little, they're large organizations. Yeah. They are all nonprofit societies as well. They live under CFNS down on Marginal Road. It's a really cool space. Yeah. And then all of those, with the exception of Strategic Arts Management, are membership-driven organizations. So they all have memberships that pay dues within their fields, and then their purpose is to work in the best interest. So not necessarily advocacy. They all kind of have their own mandates, but to support their membership. And then Strategic Arts Management is kind of the new kid on the block in that family. Tell us more about that, because that is where you work. Yes. Right? And you're the Director of External Relations. Yes. Is that right? Yeah. Yeah. So, So SAM, Strategic Arts Management, was created in 2007. Mm-hmm. So we are a nonprofit that provides subsidized arts management supports and services to professional artists and companies across Nova Scotia. That's incredible. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was not involved in the creation of it, but I helped them kind of sustain now.
Yes.
So Director of External Relations means that I'm the person navigating policies and finding funding and doing some programming and kind of that sort of stuff, directional and strategic planning.
Yeah.
I have colleagues, Bruce Klinger is one of my colleagues, Director of Internal Affairs.
And you have a ton of great consultants.
Yeah, and so what we do is we pair artists and arts administrators up with, seasoned consultants, if you will, arts administrators experienced in their fields to provide support. So it's a consulting relationship. The consultants don't do the work.
Right.
Like you're not hiring someone to write a grant application for you. You're not hiring an administrator. You're hiring a consultant. And so the idea is that it's guiding, it's skill trading, it's a consultant relationship. One of the things that was discovered early on, interestingly, once upon a time we thought the model would be, we provide supports, then eventually our clients would outgrow us. The idea was to kind of leverage them up so that they would grow to a point that they can sustain themselves and then they could move on and we would bring in new clients. One of the things that we recognized as we grew, since 2007, is that as an arts organization grew, they needed us more in different ways.
Oh, wow.
So yes, when someone comes in, they might be asking, how do I write a grant application? But as we go along, then we suddenly realize it's not just grant applications. They need financial supports. They need to know how to do maybe a feasibility study for a project, a business plan, a strategic plan,
succession planning,
governance. Governance development, board development as you grow.
Yeah,
maybe also now you need a fundraising campaign because you're going to start growing. Right. Oh, now we're growing so big, we want to start exporting. What does that mean? Now we're going to start touring. Right. So you realize that as you grow, you have to learn more. And so that's one of the awesome things about what Strategic Arts Management does is we operate the subsidies that we provide is on a sliding scale based on annual operating budgets.
Oh, nice.
So it is geared towards what the organization or the artist can actually afford. And as they grow, we are able to grow with them.
Right. Wow.
And we have some really great success stories because of that. So it's really cool. And, when we're talking about policy and these challenges, like kind of circling back when you're talking about I was talking about reactive policy. Yeah. One of the things that was a challenge for Strategic Arts Management for quite a while was we got our funding we're funded through Canada Council for the Arts. Okay. Thank you, Canada Council for the Arts. And we're also funded through the province, Community, Culture and Heritage. Thank you, Province of Nova Scotia. Yeah. And then we have private funders as well. Okay. Canada Council for the Arts, you might be aware, has recently changed their policy funding, their programming, their funding programs. Yes. Wonderfully so. Yes. Because we didn't fit. Okay. Because we do not produce art.
Oh, interesting.
We support the production of art by providing administrative supports, but we don't actually produce. Right. So I was just talking about the funding, we're funded through the Department of Community, Cultures and Heritage, not Arts Nova Scotia, because we don't produce art. Okay.
Right. But your role is super important for other people who do produce art or other organizations, I should say, who support people who do produce art.
Exactly. We've been around since 2007. We have 300 subsidized hours that we allocate annually, and they are always fully allocated. Wow. Sometimes our artists or our clients will kind of hold on to them and be nervous to use them, although they always have more hours. We can always find more hours. But we're actively used. Our biggest challenge these days is not finding clients who need us. It's finding consultants, and it's finding consultants who still have hours available that they can kind of pass over because everyone's working so much, because everyone is needed. Right. Wow. But so now we fit within the Canada Council of new funding models.
That's exciting.
So we've been funded for a while with them, thankfully. But now we properly fit. So it's good.
That is really good. I want to also talk about, which has to do, which we've touched on a little bit, but your research and that you're working on your PhD, that must be huge. I have to tell you, my sister is a medical doctor, and so she went through 16 years of schooling, and so I don't envy you because the amount of commitment and dedication. Like, I graduated university in 2004 and I was so happy to be done. Like, that feeling, I can't imagine hanging on to that for like over a decade of like, because when it's 4 years or whatever, you can kind of see it. So that's amazing that you're doing that. And to be so specific about Nova Scotia and the arts and policy, that's so exciting. So, what can you tell us like about the research and really like, what are your hopes for that research? Like, how are you going to apply it? What does that research do? Like, where does it live then? Yeah.
Probably on the top shelf of the Dalhousie Killam Library, covered in dust.
Okay, no, hardly.
That's often where, realistically, that is often where dissertations end up, unfortunately. Yeah. Doing a dissertation is this weird novelty that you put so much work into it, and then your committee reads it. If you can twist a rubber arm, your friends and your family read it, and then it goes into the library. But that said, the research from it and the data from it and the knowledge from it, that's what I will continue to use. And so that's what I will write articles with. That's what I went to Germany and presented on. That's what I use when I do work with strategic arts management. That's the knowledge that I use when I'm working with organizations such as the Bus Stop Theatre, or Queens of the Glamazon, or different groups that are applying for arts funding and helping them in terms of being an arts manager. And that's also the information that I use. I just came back from Fogo Island doing research there, which is not my dissertation research, but the knowledge that I have from my dissertation goes towards that and talking about the arts and socioeconomic development and community development that's happening there and how you can have it happen in different areas. So in terms of long-term goal, it would be, really, as I said, that the idea of the bridge, of the translator, and actively trying to kind of close that gap. I don't want to say in an advocacy role, but like just consciously closing that gap so that artists can better understand and be positioned within funding modules and policy schemes, and that public servants and policy officials and politicians all understand the impact of what their decisions are. Something as simple as, when you look at the project funding application, project funding now allows for administrative fees. You can now include that there.
Awesome.
When you look at that template, it has venue rental, artist fees, various other lines, and then it has other. Nowhere on that piece of paper, well, I guess it would be a computer screen, does it say administrative costs. So something as simple as writing that into that template then triggers emerging artists who just created a theater company, not knowing what they were doing, but just because they wanted money, they wanted the funding, to go, oh, I should pay administrators.
Right.
I should pay myself for my administrative duties, not just the time in the rehearsal hall.
Right. No, that is super important. And so it sounds like the work that you're doing in the research, it's really very much still alive. Like, it doesn't really end when you just finish your dissertation. It sounds like you can take it to other places and see sort of how other people are doing it. And so Fogo Island, that I looked up a bit of information about.
It's beautiful.
Okay, first of all, where is it? And the Arts Weekend, is that what you call the Fogo Island Arts Weekend? Where is Fogo Island?
So Fogo Island is in Newfoundland. Okay. It is the northeastern corner, if you will.
Yep.
And it's just it's a little island. It's like there's, I think, 13 communities on it. They only amalgamated, became a municipality within like the last couple years, definitely within the last decade, but I think more recent than that.
That's cool. It looked like a very creative place, and also a place where a lot of people want to go. Like, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they offer residency programs.
They have 2 residency programs, which I actually didn't know. So and Fogo Island kind of has gotten onto the map because of the Fogo Island Inn. And Zita Cobb, so she grew up there. It basically was a fishing community, and it still is a fishing community, the whole island. And as happens in rural areas, people grow up as things change. They got technology and everything else. A lot of people started leaving.
Yeah.
The fishing economy kind of went downhill, and so they had to find different ways to sustain themselves. So Zita came in with this phenomenal idea of creating this inn that is just, you go and you see it and you're like, whoa, this is an inn. Yep, this is cool.
Okay.
It's beautiful. Rooms are wildly out of my budget. It's not geared. It's not geared towards like the people of the island. It's not geared to your regular everyday person.
Okay. Right.
It's geared towards your millionaires.
Oh, wow.
It's geared towards your people with lots of money. But what it's done is it's created this kind of burst of energy.
Yeah.
And it put Fogo Island on the map, I think, I would say. But prior to that, they actually created the Fogo Island Arts Residencies.
Okay.
And so there are, I want to say 4, it might be 6 artist studios across the island. And they're international arts residencies. You have international people, professional artists coming in, doing phenomenal work and staying there. There's also, in a smaller area, there's the Tilting, one of the communities also has its own arts residencies as well, which are separate from these ones.
Okay.
Yeah. So there you have these arts residencies, and what it's doing is it's creating a artist community is happening there. So some of the artists who are attending, especially the Tilting ones, are attending, and then they're falling in love with the island because it's beautiful.
Right.
And so they're moving there.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Then you have others who are, just coming to see the area. And so you have Airbnbs are popping up and bed and breakfasts are popping up. And so you have this kind of economic development that's happening because of this artistry, and this investment in the arts.
Wow.
On the island.
Yes. Because of the investment in the arts.
Yes. So it's really cool. So what I was there was this artist weekend. It was their inaugural artist weekend to see how it went. It was awesome. And so the artist studios were open, which they're never normally open to public. So you actually got to go and see them. You got to see the studios. You got to see the people. You got to go do lectures, receptions, and exhibit openings and everything else at the Fogo Island Inn.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was really cool at weekend.
My last question is, if you inherited a windfall of money and you wanted to establish a fund, who would it serve and what would you make sure that you would do?
Cool. Okay, I'm actually really glad that you asked that, because then you were like, oh, the next question is no, I wanted to circle back and say something.
Oh, yeah.
And so this ties in perfectly. One of the awesome things or interesting things that kind of is happening on Fogo Island that's not happening here, and that if I had $1 million and I could do.
Yeah.
Shorefast is the group that's funding a lot of the activities on the Fogo Island. They're private. They can move a lot faster than government. Because as we were talking about government, you have it goes out to a consultant, they do a study, then it's going to come back to staff, they're going to do a review, then they're going to go to council if it's at the municipal level or whoever, and then they're going to review it, they're going to vote on it, then it's going to go to another study and blah, blah, blah. And then, 5-10 years has passed.
That's right. Yeah.
And by that point, the organizations that was like, can I just have this money? It's I don't even live in the province anymore. I've moved somewhere else to someone else who's going to fund me. So I would love to see more philanthropic activities and an access to that at the emerging level, not just at this big economic drive level. I would also love to see kind of a way, and I don't know what the answer is, but an understanding of simplifying the bureaucracy. So that we're not waiting 5 to 10 years for the new funding programs and decisions, and ways to understand and to communicate that need for the bureaucracy, but to make it a little bit more manageable. But really understanding that the private sector does move a lot faster.
Yeah.
But the private sector also needs the public sector. Like today at the bus stop, there were private investors who were saying not at the bus stop, council, but the bus stop. There was private investors saying, if council says yes, if Halifax Regional Municipality will fund, I'll fund.
Wow. Right.
So the government has to say yes.
Right. They need to lead.
Yeah.
Almost.
And yes, they might move slower, but they have to say yes. And then even if the paperwork happens after the fact, they have to say, yes, we're doing stuff and we're investing in emerging as well as established. We're investing in social as well as economic gains. And we're understanding that within creativity, you're allowed to fail, you're allowed to have accidents, you're allowed to have whoopsie daisies, and that's often where the best innovation comes from.
Yeah, that is so true. And if there was a fund that could recognize that, and also like yours, just to for artists to be able to move past and through that, because that is, you're right, where a lot of that innovation comes from. That's so exciting. It's an exciting time, I think, in our community in arts and culture. Like, we have a lot of people who are interested, I feel like, I want to participate. So that's really a cool idea. Like, how do we engage these private companies who want to be part of what's happening, to let them know that they, can be involved, and if they want to fund something, they could. And I don't even know if their system's set up. Like,
there are private funders, but one of the big challenges, kind of as you're saying, it's this idea of the economic gain and quantifying it, and versus qualifying it. And we don't talk about the quality of arts enough. We've lost sight of that. We've lost sight of the public good, the public benefit, and the social impact of arts.
Why it's important.
And when you're talking to a private investor and you're trying to market the artistic value versus the economic value, it's really hard, especially if they don't understand your craft or if they don't see your vision initially. It's really hard to market yourself to that. And that's where you need the government to step in and say yes.
Yeah.
To start finding ways to support and advocate for the idea of creation, not just economic gains.
I think that's brilliant. Yeah, that's super important. Thank you for talking to me today. This was really great. I feel like we just scratched the surface. We'll have to have coffee sometime. Again, yeah. Okay. Now that you're back from all your travels in Germany and Fogo Island. Thank you for telling us about what you do, and I think it's so fascinating. Are we able to read your thesis, like, at some point?
At some point, yes. Yes.
We can go to the library?
Yeah, it will go into the library once it's defended, and once it's published, and I will be sure to let you know that.
Please do.
I can send you, I don't know if it will fit in a PDF. It's going to be like 300 pages, but...
Wow, really?
Yeah, it's
okay,
long.
I know other people who want to read it too, because I've been talking a bit about it, so...
There'll be an executive summary as well, so you don't have to read all 300 pages.
Sweet. Well, still, it's still fun to learn about. So thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
I think that's great. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever you like to listen to podcasts so you never miss a new episode of Granted. Produced by Krista Keough and John Mullane at John's Studio in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Follow us on social media. We are at Granted Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, and you can follow us on Twitter at Granted_podcast.